My name is Baha'i, and it's my pleasure to join you all here today on the eve of the Summit of the Future and the launch of its associated action days. I welcome each of you on behalf of the Baha'i international community and the Global Governance Forum to this exploration on how the United Nations might be modernized for generations to come. I've been working at this office since 1994 and can testify to the fact that the notion of reforming the UN and its founding charter can be met with considerable resistance. People can feel that this topic is a distraction, for example, or that the political moment isn't right for such a discussion. In responding to such critiques, there are two realities that might be helpful for us to keep in mind. The first is that while these concerns are legitimate and well-founded, however, there's never a right moment. The time is never right for change, so international relations deteriorate. And because of the international deteriorating relations, the time is never right for change. Yet another reality is equally true, that the systems of global governance cannot and will not last forever. They will change at some point, and we would be unwise in the extreme to arrive at the moment of change, surprised and unprepared for the task. History has shown that opportunities for significant, sometimes revolutionary institutional change often arise suddenly and without warning. And in those moments of turmoil and upheaval, theories, approaches, and ideas at hand are often what are drawn on first and most extensively. The events today then seek to inject into the discourse around global governance a spirit of can-doism, as well as an impetus towards preparing advanced and serious thinking to draw on when conditions for meaningful UN reform improve. The three sessions taking place today will explore various aspects of the process and potential of charter reform. The first panel will articulate the normative changes from 1945 to today and how they can be reflected in the new charter. It will explore emerging issue areas such as the environmental Earth system crisis and the digital space. The second panel will focus on updating and upgrading existing institutions, including bodies such as the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Secretariat, and the International Court of Justice. And the third session will look forward to new institutions and arrangements that could be established, including proposals such as an Earth System Council or a UN Parliamentary Assembly. However, before we begin our first session, I'm going to ask Joshua Lincoln from the Center of International Law and Governance at Fletcher School of Global Affairs to provide us with a context and background about the second charter project. And then as the first speaker, Josh, you can start off the discussion today by sharing some remarks on the topic of today and the emerging values and principles necessary to underpin stronger levels of international cooperation to confront current global challenges.
Thank you, Bunny. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And hello to our friends online. For those of you with jet lag, I'm sorry. I don't have any this time, but my empathy is with all of you who do. Nonetheless, I invite you to clear thinking now, whether or not we're all fully capable of it. Let's give it a go. I was asked to say give 2 minutes at the outset to the sort of the background of the project, just for those who may be unfamiliar with it. And this specific project, the second charter, began in 2022 with the financial support of the Global Challenges Foundation. The idea really at the time was to respond to Secretary General Guterres' 2021 Our Common Agenda, and his invitation for a more inclusive and networked multilateralism. and confident that this was going to be the subject of a track one intergovernmental process, I think there was still a feeling that there might be something useful that could be done on a track two basis by civil society coming together and thinking about some of these same issues. This, of course, was not the only initiative. There are many such initiatives out there that have led up to the Summit of the Future. But the idea was to do what member states might perhaps be unlikely to do. And standing here the day before the Summit of the Future, I think we're validated in that judgment, which is to take a fresh look at the old charter and to sort of begin from a charter perspective rather than end up at a charter perspective. And to take a look at all the excellent work that's been done over the decades, but that is updated for 2024, and really taking into account the recent spate of research and proposals and so on. Forgive me, I'm speaking louder so that our friends online can hear me better. The intellectual antecedents of this are both narrow and wide. In this narrow context, they begin with the 2020 book by Maya Groth, Arthur Dahl, who is here online, I saw him earlier, and Augusto, putting forward some global governance proposals. There was a 2024 book, an edited collection that took some of those ideas another round. Of course, anyone and many of the people in this room know that this subject has been ongoing for decades, and therefore there's a rich tradition of work and of history, of intellectual work, of academic work, of civil society work that has been done around these subjects, probably starting with Grenville Clark and right through the H Lab. Former Mr. Lind is with us here as a member of that. And so this extraordinary continuity of work being done, work that is carried on today by any number of civil society organizations, and with many good proposals, the Climate Governance Commission, the International Environmental Forum. I saw Hans Corell up on the screen as well, who would have been involved, I think, in Kofi Annan's Enlarger Freedom in 19 short years ago. So this is to say that this is in some ways the work of many hands. But I think the focus of this exercise was less on making new proposals or trying to outshine all the other previous proposals, and more focused on the idea of taking some of the better proposals in light of 2024 and trying to see and to show how they could best be reasonably folded into a revised charter. So it was a drafting exercise. It was a proof of concept exercise. This can be done against many of the hue and cries, I suppose, that this is either impossible to do or unwise to do. I think the idea was to show, no, you could actually put reasonable people, some of us at least, you know, into a room and over a period of time ask them to look at a set of proposals and figure out how to put together a draft that would meaningfully encapsulate the wisdom of the ages and the needs of the moment. So I think that is the starting point that we take here today. In literal terms, this process began last year with a paper published and then released exactly a year ago today, making the case for UN Charter reform and trying to take a stab at the taboo. And it was accompanied by a declaration that was ultimately signed by 20 Nobel laureates and several hundred of you. And that then led to another year's worth of work to come up with the document that you have in front of you, which is a second United Nations Charter. Again, the purpose was not to put forward the indisputably best version of a revised charter. The idea was to put forward a possible version of a revised charter. We expect people to disagree. We expect people to dislike some of the proposals or some of the ways in which we ourselves had what I will politely call robust conversation. Not everyone was pleased. I did not win all the arguments. I don't know anybody who did. Many of the proposals that have come up in other reports and other books and so on were left on the cutting room floor. And that's okay. I think that would be the key message I would pass along. We acknowledged, we think it's important with humility to say, we did not represent the global community. We are not the intergovernmental process. We do not represent the stakeholders that ultimately would have to agree to such a thing. But we wanted to show in a small way that there is a path, there is a reasonable way in which such a thing could be done. So without further ado, I would just like to say that There will be one extra phase to this work, certainly, which is to add a little bit more detail to some of the different areas of the charter itself. A couple of different protocols that will need to be drawn up. Again, not because we think they will be definitive and survive the test of time, but because we think it's important to show that even down to the protocol level, some of these things can be done, can be worked out in an iterative, collaborative process. So I think without going into anything further, the context of the project, your permission, okay, I'll transition into my panel remarks. And I was asked to focus on, this panel's about normative changes, as I understand it. So I think I'm going to try and resist the temptation to speak to institutions or mechanics, and to sort of keep it at the level of norms and ideas. And I was asked specifically to speak to international cooperation and peace and security. I think for me, I'll make just a couple of points. The very first one is that I'll start at the wide end of the funnel with international cooperation. Two normative changes emerge from the second charter that are unrelated to peace and security, but are related to international cooperation. The first one is that I think the second charter deletes the World War II enemy states language and does away with two chapters. This was the beginning of the discussion. Practically speaking, what can we cut? How do we modernize it? How do we bring it up to date? And that may seem like a very archaic exercise to remove references to the enemy nations, thank you, of Japan and Germany, for example, and to take away the two now defunct chapters on trusteeship. But I think the normative change that it suggests is a very important one. It's time to draw a line under these things. Our organization should be about the future. I think we've arrived at the logical limit of reflecting 80 years of past. I would include in that not only World War II, but the process of decolonization, the process of trusteeship. In a way, it is a set of cobwebs that sometimes affect the way in which we think and we relate to one another, in a sense. If we want the United Nations of the future to serve the needs of the future, then we need to put a line under the past. I think we don't have to talk about World War II anymore. We don't really have to talk about decolonization about it. We should be talking about climate change and all of the related problems that we face today. There's a second part to it, which is the second charter embeds the idea more firmly of a living charter, meaning it anticipates that revisions, reforms, amendments to the charter would continue. It tries to bring this forward. That capacity existed in the original charter, but with very few exceptions of a very minor nature, has never been used. So amendments to the charter, revisions to the charter, well, there have been 3, I think, and they have sort of tinkered with a couple of numbers on non-permanent members of the Security Council, but they've not gone beyond that. So these two things, although they are mechanical, actually imply a normative change. We put a line under the past and we embed the idea of continuous improvement into the charter itself, far more than the instrument of 1945 could do. Turning now to peace and security, I think the main the changes that are in the second charter around peace and security are sort of premised on a diagnosis about the current work of the organization in the field of peace and security. I served, when I was a UN staff member, I served as the civilian advisor to the military head of a peacekeeping mission, a Dutch major general who was very fond of the expression that a fish smells from the head down. And it's a Dutch expression, I think, and an illustrative one. I think many of the problems related to peace and security of the organization of the United Nations, of course, refer back to the head institution that deals with those things, the Security Council. And so I think that this paralysis, we are witnessing it to an unprecedented degree. And it's very interesting to track the proposals on peace and security that come out of this with those that are in the Pact for the Future. I don't know, do we have a Rev 5? Does anybody know? This morning, we were waiting all for a Rev 5. No, okay, we don't know. Sometime today, inshallah. But I think that The paralysis we've seen over a matter of decades, now accelerating in the double context of Gaza and Ukraine, has basically had the added value that absolutely everybody now concedes, agrees, that the Security Council is not meeting its fundamental responsibility. There is an unprecedented recognition of that. And that comes along with a long simmering discontent with respect to the membership of the council, elected and permanent members, and an unresolved one out there. And these two things come together for the Summit of the Future. And the thing that's been interesting to me in rereading some of the work that's been done for the Second Charter is to realize that in a way we end up in the same place. We end up with the idea that peace and security at the United Nations means reform of the Security Council, but it means also putting peace and security back in its track and preventing it from leaching into all of the other issues that we are dealing with today. So overall, the Second Charter seeks to make the UN system more effective on peace and security, more responsive, more representative, but also to rebalance the role of the two principal organs, Security Council and the General Assembly. I'll come to that a little bit more. And to put peace and security, as I said, a little bit back in its lane as a requirement for its greater effectiveness. So it's not to dismiss it, it's to make it more effective. We need to rebalance the way in which these things have done. Part of this is to go back and to recognize that peace and security was the operating principle, the operating priority of 1945. The United Nations was sort of a peace and security organization at the outset, mentally, certainly intellectually, and you see that in the design of it. And the question that is, I think, before us is to say 80 years on, is that still the case? Is that still the right mix? The design that the Second Charter provides, this will come up in other panels, is to sort of rebalance four councils: peace and security, human rights, economic and social development, and an Earth Systems Council, and to take a more nuanced, more balanced approach and say, these are the four sets of issues that should concern all of us and that need to be dealt with at the level of principal organs, not just to have a Security Council and a General Assembly that don't really work very well together and where there is a sort of a continuing tension around these issues. So very briefly, first, no surprise, an expanded and more representative Security Council. I will not go into it. That would be entering into the discussion about institutions, except to flag again that it ends up very closely to where the Pact for the Future and the intergovernmental negotiations led by Austria and Kuwait have ended up on some of this text. In a way, we've put into the Second Charter where they might one day possibly end up if all things go well in that track. Second point, I guess I would say, is it rebalances peace and security between the General Assembly and the Security Council. I will not foreshadow that too much other than to say by introducing a parliamentary assembly on the one hand to strengthen the democratic aspect of the work of the General Assembly and to complement it, it makes use of the Uniting for Peace and the veto initiative. It seeks to embed those and to basically bring the General Assembly back into the business of peace and security, as we have seen in recent years happening more and more often. When the Security Council reaches a point of paralysis, in a graduated way, other institutions have to step in. It is seen, in fact, a healthy pressure on the Security Council itself to know that if it is not going to successfully deal with an issue, it will be taken up in another forum, in another space. This is not revolutionary. As I said, these are not new ideas or new proposals, they're existing ones, but they get folded into this exercise of the Second Charter. The last one, and I'll just really cite it as a footnote, is that there is a sort of an attempt to pull together the different aspects of disarmament, nuclear disarmament, disarmament agenda more widely, and at the same time to resurrect an aspect of the 1945 Charter that was never actually operationalized, which is the idea of a standing peace force. The 1945 Charter never took that up. It's all in the document. Instead, we reinvented the wheel, calling it peacekeeping and making it voluntary in a way subject to circumstance, in response to circumstance, starting in the 1950s. But this resurrection of this idea says, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it formally and let's basically locate it properly in the charter as opposed to have it happen outside the charter. And I think those are, if I may, I'm going to stop there. I apologize for going over my time, but I wanted to just highlight these couple of normative changes. The first one on international cooperation itself, the nature of the charter, that it puts a line under the history that has brought us to this point and allows us to more clearly focus on the future. The second one, that it embeds the concept of a living charter more directly, because that is also a requirement of the present time. And then turning to peace and security, making it more effective, making it more representative, focusing and beginning with the work of the Security Council, but also sort of rebalancing the work of the organization, and in a way preventing too many more subject areas from becoming securitized as the conversation and the discourse terms it. So with that, I hand it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh. We now turn to Anne Lind, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden and currently Special Advisor for Foreign Affairs at the Foundation of European Progressive Studies. So Anne is going to share with us her perspectives on these issues, but particularly from the lens of gender equality.
Well, thank you very much, Bunny. And I have concentrated on the gender issues because that is something that is always missing. And the United Charter of the Foundation Treaty, setting out its purpose and principle and structure, was established in 1945. And that is so different from today. And it's even hard to imagine how different it is. So while the Charter has been instrumental in promoting peace and security and cooperation among nations, it does not explicitly address normative changes, like how we see and treat gender equality or the empowerment of women. We have seen great progress over the past few decades in understanding how important gender equality is to create a better and more peaceful world. When the UN Charter was published, it focused on respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, regardless of race, sex, language, or religion. But despite this, the discrimination against women and girls for many years was still enormous and manifested itself in so many ways. There was hardly any country that did not have problem with inequality between men and women, especially in terms of jobs, education, property rights, mobility, protection from violence, and political participation, but to name a few. Given the evolving understanding of gender issues and the importance of gender equality for sustainable development, it is relevant to consider amendments to the UN Charter to include gender aspects. And that's exactly what the group within the Global Governance Forum, under the excellent leadership of Augusto Lopez-Claros, where I have been pleased to be invited as a reviewer. So I hope I have contributed a little bit in bringing the gender issue on the table. So let me tell you about the proposals in this second charter, how to strengthen the important issue of gender. Already in the first chapter, there is a new Article 7 proposed to read to eliminate all forms of discrimination, including that based on gender, and to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. To me, this is a very powerful One thing that is very clear is that representation by women is key as a tool to reach equality. When I served as a Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, we pursued a feminist foreign policy. We used the working methods called the 3 Rs: representation, rights, and resources. Representation meaning that all individuals must have the same right to participate, education, and influence in decision-making processes. Women are chronically underrepresented in key forums like the United Nations and its organs. Because of this, we collectively lose important perspectives. Several studies have also demonstrated that higher participation of women improve the process of decision-making. Therefore, based upon consideration not only of fairness, but also on enhancing the quality of decision-making, the second charter provides for an equitable gender requirement. These are the concrete proposals on how to strengthen the representation of women. The first, and I think that will be most noticed, is that there should be a new process of selection of Secretary General. The second charter proposes a system that ensures greater independence, better gender balance, and participation. Also in the chapter number 3 about the organs, the present very passive text in Article 8 reads, "The UN shall place no restrictions on the eligibility of men and women to participate in any capacity under conditions of equality to ensure gender equity." And it's now changed considerably in the new text. Now the group propose that, I say we now, identify, not a bit all, but that the UN shall ensure gender equity in all of its principal and subsidiary organs. Member states shall ensure gender equality in the appointment of the various representatives of the UN organs. And I think this is a very strong text, and I really hope that this will be taken into account. One of the proposals in the new title, the General Assembly and the Parliamentary Assembly. And you will hear more about this in the next panel. But in short, the General Assembly is an organ for nation, and Parliamentary Assembly should be an organ for the people. So in this chapter, there are two important proposals change to increase the representation of women. In a new Article 10, Paragraph 4, it's proposed to read, "Member states shall establish procedure to ensure that gender allocation of representative to the Parliamentary Assembly is consistent with the principle of equity." I often use data from the Interparliamentary Union when it comes to all kinds of statistics about parliaments. They show that last year, 2023, the average share of women parliamentarians are only 26.9%. In the proposal put on the future, where we changed everything to shall, it shows how important it is, because the Pact of the Future, as I guess all of you have read, they are very, very vague. They just say that they encourage nations to propose women. And you could see not even the European Commission, even with a strong leader as Ursula von der Leyen, managed to get 50-50, as she had in the last commission. It's only 11 out of 27 proposed new commissioners that are women. So now the new text is, and listen to this, this is really gonna shake up a bit if we go to that. "The rule shall ensure broadly balanced gender representation in election of each assembly president. No 3 consecutive presidents shall be of the same gender." So you cannot have 3 men in a row. 3 women in a row, it's unthinkable, unfortunately, but you can now have 3 men in a row. "The rules should further ensure the deliberation for the General Assembly and the Parliamentary Assembly, as well as their subsidiary bodies, and that are conducted in a transparent and inclusive manner." This is very good. In the current charter, there is a chapter, number 9, that states that the UN should promote to create conditions for peaceful and friendly relation between nations. It talks about the necessity of full employment, economic and social progress, etc. But it's a very typical chapter. It's written 8 decades ago. When you think of the normative changes that was made, it say nothing about gender equality or sustainable development, nothing. So a growing understanding on how widespread and devastating sexual and gender-based violence is, whether taking the form of mass rapes in conflicts, trafficking, not the least when women are flying from war and zones, but also domestic violence. There are no charter provision regarding this issue. So that is why the second charter proposes an amendment to the Article 55 in Chapter 9. And that amendment reads, to guarantee the universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedom for all, without distinction to race, sex, language, or religion, or any other category, and the elimination of all forms of gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and human trafficking. A new proposal. The Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, was established to be a forum that should debate and fostering advocacy on a range of issues like economy, social, cultural, educational, and often called soft issues. This body has been widely seen as rather unsuccessful, even though the issues are so important. And my hope in the future is that these issues will be treated with more seriousness in the UN. And as an innovation, the second charter proposes to include gender equality in the mandate of ECOSOC. And then the second charter is a work of progress, as Joshua said, but I have also been asked to mention if I see any outstanding issues still. And I would like to concentrate on 2 outstanding issues. One is the women, peace and security, and then the work in the Security Council and other organs. Since the UN adopted the resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, that's more than 20 years ago, we know more about how important it is to include women in all aspects in peace and security, which is the main priority of the UN. Conflicts are with the use of arms disproportionately affect groups that are already vulnerable, like women and girls. Women are chronically underrepresented in the UN, where decisions on disarmament and non-proliferations are made. And because of this, we collectively lose important perspectives. Research showed that peace agreement where women took part is more sustainable. Another important fact is that if women are not at the table, crimes like rape will not be considered part of the peace agreement that demands accountability. It will be seen as an ordinary crime. And we know that rape is used as a terrible tool in wars and conflicts. The resolution 1325 urged member states to ensure increased representation of women in all decision-making levels in national, regional, and international institutions and mechanisms for prevention, management, and resolution in conflict. In my opinion, this whole paragraph should be included in the second charter. UN member state adopted resolution 1325 because the evidence show that the higher level of gender equality are directly related to increased levels of security and stability. Women's participation in conflict prevention and resolution can improve outcome before, during, and after conflicts. For example, women's participation increased the probability of peace agreement lasting at least 2 years by 20%, and the peace agreement lasting 15 years by 35%. Yet despite this evidence, women's participation in formal peace process remained low. In 2022, women represented only 16% of the negotiation in active peace processes led or co-led by United Nations. That's a decline from 23% in 2020. No women were included in negotiation teams for conflicts in Ethiopia, Myanmar, Balkans, Sudan, or Yemen. On the 18 peace agreements concluding in 2022, only one had a woman signatory. The United Nations increased the role of women in UN mediation support teams to 43% compared to 30% in 2019, and invited local women peace builders to brief 58% of the Peace Building Commission. So to that point, I also would say the last thing about the Security Council. When Sweden, and I was in the government at that time, was a member of the Security Council 2017 to 18, we tried to change the way of United Security Council work by including women, peace and security in all discussions and decisions. We pushed for the council to brief by civil society representative and for women, peace and security to be discussed in every country file. And we showed that it is indeed possible to achieve gender balance among those briefing in the council. And we also insisted that briefing to the council include a gender perspective, including information on women's role in peace processes. That consistent request impacted what the Secretariat proposed and prepared. And it was very important. We shouldn't have to ask for a woman every single time. That should be natural. And by that, I hope that the discussion on gender issues and what I think really good proposal in the second charter will be even more developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. I'm very excited to hear about these proposals, and I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have after we hear from the next two speakers. So I'm turning over to Tad Daly, who's the president of the Americans for Democratic Action Foundation of Southern California. And previously, Tad was at the RAND Corporation think tank, an advisor to several members of the US Congress. So Tad.
Bonnie, thank you so much. Joshua Lincoln and Foreign Minister Ann Lind are difficult substantive acts to follow, but I will give it my best shot. There once was a man called Rousseau who wrote a book containing nothing but ideas. The second edition was bound in the skins of those who had laughed at the first. That was Thomas Carlyle about 1840, speaking about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And I think the analogy is quite apt. This second charter document contains nothing but ideas, crucially important ideas about our best efforts to create a positive human future. And it will be laughed at by all the hard-headed realists out there who see the world only in terms of the political possibilities of the hour. Now, I don't recommend that when the revolution comes, we send all them to the guillotine. But I do think that this project, spearheaded by Augusto and contributed to by so many here in this room, indeed holds the potential to powerfully influence the history solely through the powerful ideas contained herein. So I have a three-part agenda. First, I just would like to tell you the elements of your second charter, not just that I like, but that I think we can sell to a broader audience. Second, I want to discuss the distinction between writing a new UN charter and campaigning for a new UN charter, and why I think the two together provide a powerful synergy. Finally, I want to try to discuss the distinction between Clause 1 and Clause 2 of Article 109, and why I believe that talking openly about the veto as it applies to 109 is the best possible way to diminish its power. And then, although I may run out of time, I want to talk about something I think we had to add to the second charter's closing about our ultimate ambitions for future history. So first, if I may, 5 things that I just really dig in this document, having read it online on my little phone here, and I'm so happy to get the paper copy here in person. Number 1, we the people, not peoples. Brilliant. That evokes our global citizenship, our allegiance to humanity, what I choose to call our planetary patriotism, that all of us are members of one people. Number 2, 4 councils instead of 1. with subject matter areas, rather than just 5 countries essentially running the world. I think that has a real coherence, that subject matter expertise that people will grasp and that we can sell. Number 3, I am an enthusiastic advocate of a UNPA. I had some hope a few years back that a UNPA might actually emerge from this SOTF. But I'm really delighted not only that you include it, but that eloquently put it in the context of the direction of history. Number 4, the quote, concurrent override by the GA and the new UNPA is, I think, one of the more promising schemes of so many that have been advanced over the years to, I guess I would say, modify and evolve beyond the intractable P5 veto that just haunts everything we try to do. And number 5, finally, I am, as many people here know, I am a longtime proponent of the venerable proposal dating back at least to Trygve Lie to establish a standing all-volunteer rapid reaction United Nations peace force. I think my good friend Dan Perel would say that I have been stubbornly persistent on this point, or perhaps annoyingly insistent. My great mentor on this big idea was the late, great Sir Brian Urquhart. I've been deeply involved in the major work promulgating this idea that's happening right now at Texas A&M University. And I plead with you all, please, to read this extraordinary edited volume that they produced about it earlier this year. Give me an email address. I can email you a PDF link to it right now. So I'm really delighted that your second charter includes this as a real fundamental feature. And I read this stuff closely, Augusto, that you clearly distinguish between national governments contributing their own military forces, which too often they don't even consider in today's world because they don't have any vital national interests at stake. And I would submit that Sudan today is the quintessential example of that happening right now. Thank you for distinguishing between that and a directly recruited all-volunteer force, which would give an opportunity to people all over the world to volunteer, not just to, quote, serve their countries, but instead to serve humanity. That's a big feature of this idea that is so front and center in your second UN Charter. So now let me move on, please, and discuss my thinking about this difference between writing a new UN Charter or a second charter and campaigning for such a thing. I think that one of our main goals to advance this agenda simply ought to be to get this conversation out into the zeitgeist, part of the contemporary conversation. Let me just give you a single example. I kind of wear 2 hats in my professional life, 50% global governance innovator, but 50% I am a lifetime progressive Democratic Party activist. Bonnie mentioned I've worked for several members of Congress in some capacity, and today I'm president of this outfit based in SoCal, Americans for Democratic Action, an important part of the progressive Democratic wing of the Democratic Party ecosystem. So wearing that second hat last week, and 9 days ago, I went to a presidential debate watch party. More than 100 people there, really politically engaged, politically knowledgeable people. And we had all kinds of convos, both before and after the watch, about abortion and guns and fracking, all the hot issues. But not one person came up to me and said, hey, Tad, what do you think ought to be the main component of a second United Nations Charter? Not one. Nor did anyone ask me about the Summit of the Future coming up. And there was zero chance that Lindsay Davis or David Muir would ask such a question of the candidates. And that's what we have to change, folks. We have to find a way to make these issues part of the contemporary political conversation in my country and in many other countries. So I want to rewind the tape a little bit and share with you all something some of you know, that way back during the UN's 50th anniversary year in 1995, a couple of brash young college students, one named Richard Ponzio, an undergraduate up the road here at Columbia University, and me, Tad Daly of the Rand UCLA Policy Studies PhD program, we launched something we called the Campaign for a New UN Charter. I still think that's a pretty good name. We took great inspiration, Madam Foreign Minister, from the Commission on Global Governance, chaired by the sitting Prime Minister of Sweden, as you well recall, Ingvar Carlsson. And the most important word in the name of our audacious new initiative, the campaign for new United Nations Charter. We did not put forth a Ponzio Daily new UN Charter complete in every detail. Our message instead was that the San Francisco Charter, designed for the world of the 1930s, was far from optimal for the world of 1995 and the then looming perils of the 21st century. And no, just a quick point, I did not misspeak just now. It's a small point, but whenever people say the UN was designed for the world of 1945, I like to point out that the whole collective security mechanism, Joshua, you really touched on this, was really directed at avoiding the mistakes of the 1930s and preventing another Adolf Hitler. I'm all for no more Hitlers, but that's hardly the central challenge of our age, it seems to me. So we insisted way back in 94 and 95 that some significant rethinking of our structures of global governance was, as we put it back then, both a practical necessity and a moral imperative. And we hammered away at the point that this idea of a new UN Charter came from the framers of the San Francisco Charter themselves. So our singular call to action was to activate Article 109, the provision they included to revise their creation in order to launch a multiple stakeholder process to envision and enact a second UN Charter. Now, what we have today here from Augusto and company is, in fact, a second UN Charter with all the particulars. I applaud your work, and I have many more comments about it. And I'm delighted that you're undertaking it, as you repeatedly have said, not as a finished product, but instead as a mechanism to generate discussion and debate, and most of all, attention to this gigantic problem of the appalling unsuitability of our international institutions for our modern and ever-changing world. So I want to propose today that both exercises are vital. Both together can really serve as the outlines of a movement to maybe finally make something happen in this realm. One, a campaign to enlighten ordinary folks about the need for new mechanisms for global governance, about the need to design a second UN Charter. And then two, the continuation of major intellectual design endeavors like this one, to get thinkers to devote some brain power to asking the question, what kind of UN system would we create if we were designing it from scratch today? And the good news is that I think Heba Ali's Impact Coalition for UN Charter Reform, I know many of you are familiar with it, does in fact aspire to be that kind of campaign. The purpose of writing a second charter to debate, to generate real conversation and interest among actual international affairs scholars and activists and practitioners. The purpose of campaigning for a new United Nations Charter is to generate ordinary citizen interest and enthusiasm, which eventually we can and must translate into political pressure on those who hold the levers of power, both inside and outside governments, who ultimately we must motivate to make it happen. So I think because time is tight, I'm going to save my thinking about this difference between Clause 1 and Clause 2 of Article 109 and how we might defuse the veto over the question of charter revision. Hopefully there'll be another opportunity to talk about that at some point. But let me finally offer my suggestion for something to add to the conclusion of our second charter about the direction of human history. I have another ancient quote for you. Quote, "I believe that at some future day, the nations of the earth will agree on some sort of Congress whose decisions will be as binding as the decisions of the Supreme Court are on us. And I believe that our great maker is preparing the world to become one nation when armies and navies will no longer be required." That was the American president, Ulysses S. Grant, in his second inaugural address. He's the general who won the Civil War for Abraham Lincoln, and someone who I dare say knew a little bit more about armies and navies than any of us in this room. Augusto, I'm so delighted to see the phrase complete and comprehensive disarmament in your second charter. And I want to propose that as we move this work forward, it bears considerable elaboration, both to capture popular imagination and to enable this document to set us on the road to what must be humanity's ultimate goal, and that is a world without armies. A world that does not accept standing national military forces as a permanent feature of all of human history. I'm wrapping up right now, Bonnie. A human community that has evolved beyond groups of humans pointing sticks at other groups of humans forever until the end of time. Just scrolling to the end here. Everybody just seems to accept without question that nations must eternally compete in whatever the latest military technologies might emerge. And this is a problem partially because it eventually will lead to cataclysmic war, but it's also a problem because even when there is no war, we expend unfathomable amounts of our blood, toil, tears, and treasure to preparing for war. And that's what I submit we have to evolve beyond. We must declare the goal, however distant, of the eventual elimination of all national military forces. We must openly and unambiguously state our ultimate destination is a world without armies and a world without war, because that's the only way that we can ever tackle our great transnational existential challenges, that we can make manifest our planetary patriotism, and that's the only way we ultimately can act on behalf of the entire circle of life, our one human race, and the planet of our birth, suspended among the blazing and indifferent stars, lonely and fragile and whole. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tad, and thank you for not having lost your passion over these 30 years. We now turn to Jens Orbeck, who is currently Strategic Advisor of the Global Challenges Foundation and was formerly Minister for Democracy, Integration and Gender Equality in the Swedish government. Jens.
Thank you very much. And yes, I was requested to talk a little bit about the normative development of the world, actually from 1945 to up today. A lot have been said, so I will maybe give a little more time to discussion. But I thought of telling you from my perspective four things, what I saw as the aims, the day when the UN was founded in 1945, what have changed during that time, and what are the new measures that we need, and also maybe land in possible dilemmas, and also dilemmas for this second charter. I think the whole process is actually about how do we decide issues together. I like to take decisions as close to the people that are affected by these decisions as possible. But there are some decisions that we need to take together because many of the challenges are now passing our borders, whether we want it or not. And I guess you can describe the way that the UN have worked with a half glass or a full glass or an empty glass or half from both sides. But if I would look at the half glass, there hasn't been a World War II, III yet. There has been a recognition of human rights. 1945, my own mother was a prisoner of war at that time, 17 years. And nobody wanted to experience that again. And there was a strong belief that we should give some sort of dignity to people. And I think that the UN really have given us something there. Then there was also a strong promotion of human rights and of development and humanitarian aid. And I think the UN has also been rather successful in these areas. But I was a little bit scared the other day when we in Sweden had a new Minister for Foreign Affairs saying that the main aim of foreign policy for Sweden was to make it best for Sweden. And I think she was thinking then of migration and trade, but the best for Sweden is actually, I think, to be also supporting the possibility to take decisions together, not the least looking at the global challenges that we are facing today. Well, I think the main normative changes that we have seen during these 80 years is that at the beginning we have had a very strong wish for self-determination, decolonization, but we can also see that in this development, the respect for human rights has also been violated behind the sovereignty. And that is, of course, a new dilemma. And as you both know, and that is the focus of the foundation that I'm working with, we can see extreme challenges connected to climate changes, to environmental changes, and so on. And now new ones coming up, and we had a pandemic, we have AI, and you can really see that the first charter is not dealing with that. We can also see, I don't need to talk about that in this room, that the Security Council is not living up to expectations, but rather living up to self-interest, and there is a lot of hypocrisy that we can see there in the last years. And in the same time, we have had a big change of growing gaps, not only between countries, but also in countries. So what are the new measures that we really need? Yes, we need a stronger security policy, and I'm really glad about the writings here in the second charter, although I think it's going to be difficult, of course, but maybe a step that makes it easier is to also keep these permanent members for a while. I myself am a strong, I believe strongly in the rule of law and also in the strengthening of the international courts, the ICJ and also the ICC. And here, I think we also have to discuss to what extent they will go into different aspects, keeping also the thoughts of subsidiarity that I was highlighting. In order to have some sort of legal power for the General Assembly, you also need legitimacy. That goes hand in hand. And that is, I think, a difficult point. And if you look at the General Assembly, and you, Augusta, have provided us with figures, you can see that there could be a majority, a strong majority, I think 2/3 of a majority decision within the General Assembly, with only 7% of the Earth population. And that is not a strong legitimacy, actually. I think it's really nice to have one country, one vote. But if you talk about legitimacy, you also have to look into the Earth population. And therefore, I think the idea of a parliamentary assembly is very crucial. And I'm glad it's here. And it's going to be a development that I think is interesting, and I think we can take some learnings maybe from the European Union, where the assembly was not as strong in the beginning, but where it has developed and where you can go to from an advisory board actually to a legal organization. I'm also very happy about the Earth System Council, and on the plane here, I read about ice. And why should I read about ice? Why should I be there? There's a lot of Greek coming up. It's the biosphere, the stratosphere, the hydrosphere, and the cryosphere. The cryosphere is the ice. I haven't need to bother about that, but the fact is actually that mankind now is affecting biosphere, stratosphere, cryosphere, and hydrosphere. And therefore, we also have to take decisions together on these enormous, big, until now balanced Earth system boundaries that are now and will in the beginning, in the future, affect our life because we affected it. So that is a really new development, and I think that will be also a normative development when it sinks into us that these are issues that we really need to deal with, or that the ice really is melting. Finally, the dilemmas I sort of comes up to me when I'm reading there. It is about this subsidiarity, that should we give more power to the union and at the same time respect this national sovereignty that we all like. And when you read about the history of this, you also come into not only Andreas Bombal, but Einstein. He had the same thoughts of the incompatibility between national sovereignty and security. And here I think we have to be smart, but I think the national sovereignty cannot be respected in all matters. And I was very happy, both when you look at the human rights, but for instance, one norm, a decision we're taking 2005 about the responsibility to protect. And that was a new norm, saying that a country that cannot define its own people, you can do something. It has to be a decision by the Secretary, what do you call it? The Security Council, but nevertheless. And I have been thinking of this and thinking of the situation that we are now. And when I listen to Ann Linde here about gender equality, there are so many examples now on actually war against women. And I'm thinking of Afghanistan, for instance, where women cannot speak loudly outside their home and not going to school and things like that. And I think maybe we need another norm. It's not responsibility to protect, but responsibility to respect. Responsibility to respect human rights. That came to me when I read that, and to see if we have this Council of Human Rights, how strong can it be, and what issues can it bring on to it, and lift up to the General Assembly for endorsement. And here's another dilemma I see: what issues should we put in there? Should we put the fundamental rights of sexual and reproductive health? Yes, maybe that's such a fundamental right, but what decision will be taken in that body? When I was a Minister of Gender Equality, we had the issue of abortion. Should we bring that to the European Union? Yes, I think it should be a fundamental right, but the decision in that body would go against us. So there is also a timing issue here, but in the long run, I think we need to leave power. I think we have always also been afraid in the country where I came to, when votes were given to workers and peasants and not dukes, that they would take the wrong decisions. But in my view, we need to take decisions and have a stronger UN. But there are dilemmas in that path, as I just said. And just being able to also comment on the speakers before me, Ted, on the campaigning. I really like the setting of this second charter, because it invites different circles of people that can support us. First, it is a circle that thinks this first charter is not okay. That's all I'm bothering about. It doesn't work the way it should. So that's one circle that we can attract. The second circle could be attracted that you so elegantly pointed out different issues that need to be addressed. It could be the climate issue, for instance. It could be security. It could be human rights. And then you have the third circle, those who want to go with us all the way into nitty-gritty and see, here we have examples. So I think that the campaign actually could be directed to not one group, but the 3 groups, and that will make it bigger. And I actually think that some of the items that you discussed after looking at the election debate on fracking, on abortion, it is connected here. But I mean, the Earth System Council maybe take decisions or ask for endorsement in the General Assembly on how to work with fossil fuels and things like that. So it could be debated here. But then we have the dilemma on what issues and to what details should we be able to take decisions, because our enemies, they would say you should not go into that. That's a national issue, and you should not bother in our sovereignty. So that is, of course, a dilemma how to see on what level you should bring in issues here. I stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jens. I think perhaps it could be a university major, the second charter of the UN, or even in a high school course. So we have a whole new generation that's actually seriously considering the future of the world and governance. So we have just about 15 minutes left, but the good news is we have 2 other panels following this one. So if there is somebody who hasn't had a chance to share their views or ask questions, we can always do that later. So do I see any hands, any questions? I see one online, Abdul Sattar Dulal. And Ria Raj. There are 2 online, and then we'll come to the room. Please go ahead, Mr. Dulal.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much that adding me. And it is a great honor that listening all these excellencies speech and excellent speech. I want to say that. What I want to question, and before that, I want to say that about the UN Charter, major part of it is a peace and security issue. But how it enforce, and that approach is not really clear in that charter. If any nation break the principle, what will be the punishment? No example is visible to us. One of the practical example I want to share here is that recently our autocratic leadership has ended with sacrificing the lives of thousands of students and diverse background people, and many hundreds people are live with the disabilities due to the recent movement. And when the leader, autocratic leader, she left to the India and she maintained her safe life there. So my point is that killing all these people, and also her one of the minister responsible for land, and he corrupting billions dollars here and purchasing 360 houses, properties in England. And this create what I want to say, lot of each issue in the country that affected 170 million people. At same time, our disabled people and percentage of disabled people are increasing due to all these unethical practice, this corruption. So my point is, sir, how our UN Charter, how in our future UN will address these types of issue, and how they control it. Do it is possible to control these types of killing, these types of autocratic leadership, to corrupt these types of corruption? UN is able to introduce a new law or convention that is enforced by the UN authority. I mean, legally, UN should have some authority to control these types of things.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Madam
much.
Chair.
Thank you. So some sort of an accountability mechanism, I understand. There was another hand up in the audience, but I don't see. The camera's off. Your camera's off. Well, please go ahead. While we are waiting for the person online, I turn to Renzo Pomi from Amnesty behind me.
Thank you. Well, very quickly I was wondering if the second charter it proposes so many changes which will prompt a lot of negative reactions and then opposition. What I want to understand, why is it that the second charter doesn't go directly for eliminating the veto and further reforming 27.3? Basically, that's the question. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Renzo.
Thank you. Rebecca Shute, Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions. So one question and one reflection. The question is a somewhat existential one that Augusto and maybe some others have heard me ask before, which is, if we want to encourage the UN Charter to be seen as a living, breathing, evolving document, we want to set an ordinal number behind its next phase of evolution, as opposed to looking at it as a continuously being revisited and never perfected. And the observation was to Bunny's last point about there being enough rich material here for a college course or indeed a high school initiative. Organizations like mine are actually doing this. We have a program for high schoolers called Model UN Plus, or Model UN Reform. And so there, high school age students are not just simulating the UN as it is, but imagining what it could be. And so we have them looking at the second UN Charter, and we have them considering these ideas. And it's truly fascinating to see what these young minds come up with. So I'm very happy to speak to anybody else who's interested in that program.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you. We go back online to Ria Raj.
Hello, am I audible?
Barely. Please go ahead.
She's muted, Bonnie.
Your mic is muted. If you unmute that, we could hear her. Can you speak, say something?
She's still
We did hear her.
Oh, you're good.
There you go.
Okay, hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. And so my question also in furtherance as to why just not remove veto, but also the permanent 5 members? Because I feel the veto creates a shield for the 5 permanent members, allowing them to act without accountability, as we are seeing in a lot of multiple cases of Russia taking advantage of it in Ukraine, and even when it was the ongoing conflict of Syria, it was the Russia which vetoed. So why not just remove the 5 permanent member completely? Because those 5 permanent back then were quite relevant, but as of now, there are many other important countries which, instead of being a part of the permanent member, if they are actually so powerful, there should be an election and they can prove themselves to be powerful through re-voting, re-election again. So any, input or insights on this would be really grateful.
Thank you. Thank you, Ria. So there's no more time for additional questions or comments. So we turn back to the speakers. And if something's not addressed here, as I mentioned, we have 2 other panels and we can explore the issues in more detail then. So who would like to start?
Let me just say a quick word in response to the question of the veto that has now been raised twice. And I think it's a very important question. The first I would say is I think I can't speak for everybody who was involved in this, but I think if we thought that the removal of the veto, plain and simple, were acceptable and viable, we all be very happy with that. I think a number of points through this process, we had to balance evolution and revolution. We had to ask ourselves the question, yes, we could put the revolutionary choice down on paper, but it would add fuel to the fire of this is undoable and untenable and Panglossian and so on. And so I think when the choice came between revolution and evolution, we went just to the side of evolution, but as close to revolution as we could. And I think this reflects the idea that, again, this doesn't mean that that pressure and action and popular views and expression of outrage and sentiment against the work of the Permanent Five should cease. I think we all think it should continue. It's valid. The criticisms are valid. And so I would encourage anyone who is in favor of that to continue that work. And all the more so because it is the only way in which some of these more evolutionary suggestions will be taken seriously. That is the world of politics that we live in. I just want to react to the high school. 3 years in a row, I've been going to India and engaging high school students there in Lucknow on some of these issues. I am constantly amazed by their knowledge, their enthusiasm, their analysis of the problems, and so just to applaud the work and to ask the question, and they're fully capable of digesting these issues when one takes them to them and talks about a world parliament, a parliamentary assembly versus a general assembly, working through the numbers, understanding majorities, minorities, the protection of rights, but the promotion of the rule of the majority. So I think it's actually a fantastic field to begin to sow some of these ideas into the conversation at that point. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And there's a comment in the chat from Jane Colvin asking for a link to provide more information. So Jane, somebody will send you some information on the school project. Tad.
Thanks, Bonnie. I too, like you, Joshua, want to speak about the veto and the P5, and two separate people raised that topic. You know, I drew this distinction between campaigning for a new UN Charter and writing a new UN Charter, but there's another distinction I might have talked about, and now I'm going to talk about it for a second, which is writing a second UN Charter that is somewhat realistic, that we can somewhat imagine might possibly come to pass perhaps in this decade. And I think that's what you women and men really set out to do. And I applaud you for doing it. But I would also like to suggest that there might be a different intellectual exercise, and maybe someone else, a completely different project, ought to undertake it. And that would be, let's just sit down and imagine the ideal world political order and the ideal international institution, at least for a moment, leaving all questions of political reality aside. If we were in charge of just designing the perfect international institution that we could imagine, given the 21st century context, what might that be? I think that would be also a very useful intellectual exercise that could advance our agenda very well.
Thank you, Tad. And actually, Dan and my colleagues had something like that in mind. We have a room set aside, which is called the Room for Optimism. And we encourage the people here to walk in there and just record what your thoughts are for the future. What are your aspirations and hopes for the future? So we can capture those and perhaps hand that over to the group that's going to talk about this future project. And do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? Otherwise,
no, just about the veto, because it always comes up, and I mean, also working for more than 3 decades in the political sphere and in many different government offices and so on. And when it comes to the question of veto, it's nearly impossible to make a change. So what you need to do, what we tried to do when we had the positions was to talk about a veto-free culture, to try to make it as impossible, to try to make it as difficult as possible to use the veto. And actually there has been some positive ways here. I think it's 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when there was a decision that if you use the veto, within 2 weeks, you have to go to the General Assembly and explain for the General Assembly why you took the veto. So it's kind of a name and shame mechanism. And in a very, very tough question, this of course doesn't work. But still, if we could make it harder, to make the thresholds harder for the countries to use the veto, that would be a step on the way. Because as it looks now, we don't want to make everything impossible just because this issue is not possible at this time.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, and also if you go back to San Francisco 1945, there were countries there that truly expected that there would be an look into the Charter review again. So there was a San Francisco promise there that hasn't been held. So if you wanted, you can see it like a global coup in a way from these 5 countries. So I'm not a fan of it, but I think one of the responses have been also to call this a second charter. That it's a humble way to say there will be a 3rd charter and there will be a 4th charter. So this is an evolving process that have to take place, actually.
Thank you so much. I think we've covered a lot of issues, and we have the rest of the day to discuss these matters in more depth. I have lots of questions, but I thought I'd save them for the discussion on institutions, particularly when it comes to Security Council matters. So I'm looking forward to the next 2 sessions. I know there are a number of people who had RSVP'd, and they'll probably make their way in as well. So we're going to have a lively rest of the morning and afternoon. Augusto, do you have any? Thank you.